Story 1. The Haunting of Ravenswood College. Ravenswood College, an ancient and prestigious institution, has a history etched into its very walls. For years, the campus had been a peaceful place, but after a series of strange events, it seemed as though something dark and restless had taken root. Students and faculty spoke of eerie sounds echoing through its ancient buildings at night, unexplained temperature drops, and a feeling of being watched. One evening, a new student named Daniel, who had recently enrolled at the college, heard rumors from his peers about an old abandoned building on campus. The structure, located at the far end of the college grounds, had been sealed off for years, but no one seemed to know why. Intrigued, Daniel, who was known for his boldness, decided to uncover its secrets. That night, his friends dared him to venture inside the building. They promised him a challenge that no one else dared to take on. With a grin, Daniel accepted the dare and made his way toward the haunted building at 2 a.m. The building was a 7-story structure, its silhouette barely visible in the dark. When Daniel entered, he was immediately struck by an overwhelming sense of cold. The air felt thick and heavy, and the faintest sounds of rustling seemed to surround him. The building's lights flickered sporadically, casting unsettling shadows that made his skin crawl. As Daniel ventured deeper into the building, he found himself on the 3rd floor, where a strange sound caught his attention. It was the sound of a woman crying. The sobs echoed through the empty halls, sending chills down his spine. Daniel wanted to turn back, but something urged him forward, pulling him toward the source of the sound. Suddenly, a vision appeared before him. A woman standing in the hallway, her eyes filled with terror. Her face was pale, and tears ran down her cheeks. She was eerily silent, but her presence was overwhelming. Her name was Eliza, a student of Ravenswood College who had tragically died in 1963. Since her death, her restless spirit had haunted the campus, unable to move on. Eliza's story was tragic. She had been part of a controversial experiment conducted by one of the college's esteemed professors. The experiment had been intended to push the boundaries of human endurance, but it had taken a dark turn. Eliza had been subjected to cruel and inhumane testing, and in the end, her life had been snuffed out by the professor's hands. Her spirit remained trapped in the building, seeking vengeance for the cruel fate she had suffered. As Daniel stood frozen, the ghostly figure of Eliza whispered, "Why are you here? I will take my revenge." Her voice was haunting, filled with both sorrow and rage. Daniel, paralyzed with fear, could not move. It was as if an invisible force was holding him in place. Eliza's ghost approached him, her eyes burning with the desire for justice. But Daniel, despite his terror, realized that he had to uncover the truth to free Eliza's spirit. He knew that the only way to stop the haunting was to learn what had happened to her. He began searching through the building, desperately looking for any clue that could shed light on her death. After hours of combing through old records and files, Daniel discovered the truth. The professor who had conducted the cruel experiments on Eliza had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after her death, but the college had covered up the entire incident. With the truth in hand, Daniel confronted Eliza's spirit. "Your death was a tragedy, and I will make sure the world knows the truth," he promised. As he spoke, Eliza's ghost softened, her expression changing from anger to sorrow. The revenge she sought was not just for her death, but for the injustice that had been buried for so long. With one final, haunting look, Eliza's ghost whispered, "Thank you," before vanishing into the ether. The temperature in the building rose and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The haunting of Ravenswood College came to an end. However, Daniel knew that the college's history would never be the same. Ravenswood was a place where the past could never truly be erased, and some spirits never found peace. Story 2. The Ghost of Professor Whitaker. Cresthill University was a small college nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, known for its rich history and picturesque campus. But among the ivy-covered walls and cobblestone paths, one building stood apart, Whitaker Hall. Built in the late 1800s, it was one of the oldest structures on campus and home to the philosophy department. By day, it looked like any other academic building. By night, however, it was a place no one dared to go. Legend had it that Professor Edwin Whitaker, the building's namesake, never left. Whitaker had been a brilliant but eccentric philosophy professor in the early 1900s, known for his obsession with mortality and the afterlife. He spent his days lecturing about the nature of death and his nights conducting strange experiments in his office. His students admired his intellect, but whispered about his odd behavior, how he'd speak of crossing the veil as if he'd experienced it himself. In 1923, Professor Whitaker died suddenly in his office. Some said it was a heart attack. Others claimed it was the result of one of his experiments gone wrong. His body was found slumped over his desk, a candle still burning beside him. After his death, strange occurrences began in Whitaker Hall. Lights flickered without explanation, doors slammed shut on their own, and students reported hearing footsteps in empty hallways. Over the years, the building earned a reputation as haunted, and many avoided it after dark. One cold October night, a group of students decided to put the legend to the test. Among them was Sarah, a sophomore journalism major with a knack for investigative reporting. She had heard the stories about Professor Whitaker and was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with flashlights and a digital recorder, she and her friends snuck into Whitaker Hall just after midnight. The air inside was heavy and cold, far colder than it should have been. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as they made their way to the second floor where Whitaker's old office had been. The door to room 207 was slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Sarah pushed it open cautiously, revealing a dusty, untouched office. The shelves were lined with books about philosophy and the occult, and an old desk sat in the center of the room, its surface covered in faded papers. As Sarah approached the desk, the temperature dropped even further, and the faint smell of burning candles filled the air. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. One of her friends screamed, but Sarah held her ground, determined to record whatever happened next. Then they heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hallway. The group huddled together, their flashlights flickering as the footsteps grew louder. A figure appeared in the doorway, a tall man in an old-fashioned suit, his face pale and expressionless. It was Professor Whitaker. "Why are you here?" His voice boomed, cold and commanding. "This is my domain. Leave or face the consequences." Sarah, shaking but resolute, stepped forward. "Professor Whitaker," she said, her voice trembling, "we mean no harm. We just want to know why you're still here." For a moment, the ghostly figure said nothing. Then he moved closer, his hollow eyes locking onto hers. "I sought the truth," he said. "I wanted to understand death, but in doing so, I trapped myself between worlds. Now, I guard this place. No one must disturb the balance." The room grew darker, the shadows twisting and writhing as Whitaker's presence intensified. Sarah's friends begged her to leave, but she couldn't. "Professor," she said, "is there a way to help you, to free you?" Whitaker paused, his ghostly form flickering. "The truth must be revealed," he said. "My journals, hidden in this room, contain the answers. Bring them to light, and I may finally rest." Sarah and her friends searched the office frantically, eventually uncovering a false panel in the wall. Behind it was a stack of old leather-bound journals. As soon as Sarah touched them, Whitaker's ghost let out a deep sigh, his form growing faint. "You have what you need," he said. "Do not fail me." The lights in the room brightened, and the oppressive cold lifted. Whitaker's ghost disappeared, leaving the students shaken but alive. Over the next few weeks, Sarah pored over the journals, uncovering the details of Whitaker's experiments and his tragic obsession with the afterlife. She published an article in the campus paper exposing the forgotten history of Professor Whitaker and his untimely death. After the truth was revealed, the strange occurrences in Whitaker Hall ceased. Students no longer feared the building, and Sarah earned a reputation as the bravest journalist on campus. But she never forgot the chilling encounter with Professor Whitaker, and she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere his spirit was finally at peace. Story -3: The Ghost of Aaron Blake. Cresthill University in New England was famous for its academic excellence and serene campus. But for all its charm, one place on campus carried a sinister reputation: the library. It wasn't just a quiet place for late-night study sessions. It was the haunt of a ghostly figure, the tragic spirit of Aaron Blake. Aaron had been a top-performing senior in 1985, known for his brilliance and his obsession with perfection. A physics major with dreams of groundbreaking discoveries, Aaron was always seen in the library, poring over books, filling pages of notes, and muttering equations to himself. But as finals week approached that year, Aaron seemed to unravel. Whispers of his struggle spread among the students: his sleepless nights, his frantic scribbling, his refusal to leave the library even to eat. One December night, Aaron vanished. He was last seen sitting in his usual spot in the far corner of the library. The next morning, his books, notes, and an unfinished research paper were found scattered across the desk. But Aaron was gone. Despite searches, no body was ever recovered. Officials dismissed his disappearance as a runaway case, but the students had another theory. Aaron never left the library. Over the years, strange occurrences fueled the legend. Books fell from shelves on their own. The air turned freezing cold in certain parts of the library. Some claimed to hear muttering late at night, and a few unlucky ones swore they saw a pale figure hunched over a desk in the shadows. Enter Lucas, a first-year student who had recently transferred to Cresthill. Lucas was skeptical about ghost stories, even when his roommate told him about Aaron Blake. "It's just a tale to keep freshmen from cramming all night," Lucas scoffed, but his roommate shook his head. "Don't joke. People say if you stay too late, Aaron might mistake you for someone trying to steal his work. He doesn't like intruders." Lucas, ever the skeptic, decided to investigate. On a snowy December evening, with finals week looming, he stayed in the library until closing. By midnight, the lights dimmed and the last few students trickled out. Lucas stayed behind, his flashlight in hand, and headed for the far corner of the library. The silence was deafening. As Lucas approached Aaron's desk, the temperature plummeted, and a strange metallic smell filled the air. His flashlight flickered, and then he heard it: the faint scratching of a pen on paper. "Who's there?" Lucas called, his voice shaking slightly. A shadow moved in the corner. As Lucas stepped closer, he saw a figure hunched over the desk, scribbling furiously. The figure looked up, revealing a pale, hollow-eyed young man in outdated clothes. It was Aaron Blake. "Why are you here?" Aaron's voice was cold and hollow. His translucent hands gripped the pen tightly, even though the paper beneath it was blank. Lucas froze, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. I wanted to know what happened to you," he stammered. Aaron's ghost stood, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. "I stayed too long. I wanted perfection, but it consumed me. Now I'm trapped. This place, it's my prison." Before Lucas could respond, the room seemed to shift. The rows of bookshelves stretched endlessly, and the walls faded into darkness. Aaron's ghost loomed closer, his once sorrowful expression twisting into anger. "Do you want to end up like me? Bound to this place, forgotten?" Lucas took a step back, his breath visible in the icy air. "No, I don't, but maybe I can help you." Aaron's ghost paused, his anger softening into desperation. "Help me?" "Yes," Lucas said, his voice steadying. "What do you need?" Aaron pointed to a dusty stack of notebooks on the desk. "My work. It's unfinished. If the world sees it, maybe I can finally rest." Lucas nodded and spent the next few nights poring over Aaron's notes. Despite the ghostly encounter, he found himself captivated by Aaron's work, a complex theory that could revolutionize physics. Lucas presented the findings to a professor who was astonished by the brilliance of the forgotten research. Within weeks, the university announced Aaron's work to the scientific community, giving him posthumous recognition. That night, Lucas returned to the library where he found Aaron's ghost waiting for him. "You did it," Aaron said, his voice softer now, almost human. "Thank you." As Lucas watched, Aaron's form began to fade, his translucent features breaking apart like mist. With a faint smile, Aaron whispered, "I'm free." The library felt warmer that night, the oppressive silence replaced by a peaceful stillness. The legend of Aaron Blake came to an end, but his story lived on, not as a ghost tale, but as a reminder of how ambition, when left unchecked, can consume us. And as for Lucas, he became a legend in his own right, the only student brave enough to uncover the truth and bring peace to the ghost of Aaron Blake.